Okay, we're going to move on to lesson 6. Now this might be the last lesson of day 1, or some people may have ended it on lesson 5. It might be the end of day 1. Either way, it works out pretty well. So lesson 6 is all about transitions. So what we do to begin with is go up to our rough cuts, right? And then go over to O3 Transitions and FX. Double click that to load it into our timeline viewer. And then we can switch back to our big trim mode, which will work for transitions as well. So we go up to workspace, come down to layout presets, and choose big trim load preset. And we just load that up. So that gets rid of our media pool layouts. We have a larger area for our viewers. We actually don't need both viewers, so we're going to come up and click on the button to remove our source viewer, and now we just have a single viewer. Much nicer. And I will Shift Z to see the entire timeline in here. Now, the other thing you can do is come over to your timeline view options if you want and increase the size of your video track and maybe shrink the size of your audio track a little bit. And to begin with, the first thing that we really do is we add up a fade. We talk about a fade up, and if you hover your mouse over any clip in the timeline, you'll see that it gets these white handles. And if we go to any of the white handles, we'll go to the very beginning of our clip, the first clip, and you'll see if you hover over it, you get these white arrows pointing in either direction. You can click and start dragging in, and this will create a fade up. I'm going to create just a quick 10 fade up and move to the beginning and just play it.
In this film, making a documentary.
So it's a really nice, easy way to create a fade up transition. Now, you do that on the first clip, and then the next clip you go to this first red marker in the timeline here. So we can just click on it, and the cut that comes up, this is the play point, the point where you can start playing. And what we're going to do is add a transition between this South Pole 08 South Pole clip and the 07 Kenya clip. So first you play over it, and once you see it, you say, okay, now if you want to add a transition, what you can do is hover over it as if you're going to trim both sides of the transition. If you're creating a rolling trim, you hover over it, you've got your mouse cursor looking like a rolling trim, you select it, and then you come up to your timeline menu and choose Add Transition. And it adds a 1 second default transition, and you can play over it so people can see it. It's also good at this point, if you want to modify it, to zoom in on this transition until you can at least see the name right here of the effect. Now if you want to change the duration of this, you can hover over the right edge and you can stretch it out, or you can pull it back in. I just shorten it by a half second. There isn't much handle for you to expand, and you do talk about handle at this point. For instance, if you want to show them how, if you drag out, eventually you can't drag out any further because you don't have enough captured media from either the South Pole or the Kenya clip. So you can only make it so long, but we bring it down, we make it about a half second transition, and then we let go. And if we want to do any more to this transition, we would go into the inspector. So you come up to the upper right and you click on the inspector, and here you have the upper portion of the inspector shows you a generic transition, a kind of set of parameters for your duration or your alignment if you want it to start on cut or end on cut. And it shows you the transition type. Down below is a more specific set of controls for the effect that you've applied, so this will change depending on the transition type. We can change this cross dissolve to a film cross dissolve and maybe do ease in, ease out, and then you play over it so people can see that effect. And if you like this transition and you want to keep it for future use, we can just right click over it and say create transition preset, and you can give this a name, whatever you want to call it. And where it puts it is in the effect library. So we come up to the effect library and we click on that to open it up. And you'll see the one with the yellow highlight icon off to the left over the name is the custom transition that you created. Now if we want this transition, we're going to use this throughout our project, we may want to use the keyboard shortcut with it. So you can right click and you can say set this as the standard transition, and when you do that, anytime you use the command T or go up to the timeline menu and choose add transition, it will use this transition as its default transition. Okay, so then we talk about other things that are in the effect library, other types of transitions. You have your wipes and things like that, and the way you would add these would be just by dragging and dropping. So this is where we add a smooth cut. So I'm going to Shift Z to see my entire timeline, come to where this jump cut is on this second interview section, and we can zoom in if we want to. And you might play over it so they can see the jump cut.
Back to that location, or it didn't make.
Right? And so you talk about how you can go in and you can choose to get any transition type in here and just drag and drop it on. Now, if you don't want to scroll down the list, you can come up to the top of the effects library and see this little magnifier glass. That's a search function, so you can click on it and get the search field, and then I can type in smooth because I'm looking for a smooth cut transition. So once it finds it, to apply it, all I have to do is click and drag it over onto the cut point, and it gets added. Now, smooth cut is a little different from other types of transitions in that it really works best when it is about 3 or 4 frames long. So I'm just going to select it, come up to my inspector, and where it says frames, I'm going to click there and just enter in 4, and it makes a very short transition that works for this type of transition. And you might explain what it's really doing, and what it really is trying to do is it's trying to warp the two sides of the cut so that they morph and blend together, and makes it look like a seamless cut. So then you can come back and you can play it.
Back to that location, or it didn't make the.
And it looks pretty seamless.
Back to that location, or it didn't make the movie.
So it's a pretty easy thing to do. Clearly, the closer the two sides of the cut are, in position-wise, framing-wise, and what's in the content, like the background's not moving much. So all that stuff makes it easier for smooth cut to work. The more different the two sides of the cut are, the less chance it will work. All right, so that's what we do with smooth cut, but there are also filter effects. So if we want to come and add other types of effect, I'm first going to come up and clear out my search function, and then talk about how you have these different types of effects. The open effects are more filter types effects as opposed to the transitions that are up the top here. And so if we wanted to come to our open effects list, you'll get all the different types of filters, resolve effects that ship with Resolve. Now, we used these in lesson 1, and we used it on the color page. Here we're going to use it on the edit page. They're the same effects, and they work in both places. And so if we wanted to come in, and what we do is we scroll down the list to this Bay Area shot. I'm just going to back off a little bit in terms of zooming it. It is the last marker. In case you want to jump to the marker, you can use that as a guide. This Bay Area clip is one that we want to add more of an effect to. And what we want to do is use a special filter in Resolve called a tilt shift filter. It's a tilt shift blur. It mimics a tilt shift lens, which is kind of a unique style lens you can put on a camera. So if we wanted to find it, we could certainly scroll down the list if you wanted to. It is underneath the stylize tilt shift blur right here, or you could search for it, either way. But we're just going to drag it on now. If you are using a studio version, this will work fine, but in most cases, if you're using a standard free version, you'll get this, which is you've reached the limited, you're using a limited version of Resolve. You can't use this Resolve effect. So some Resolve effects are reserved for the studio version, and some you can use in just the free version. So it says, do you want to buy the studio version? We're going to say not yet. You end up with a watermark over there. You can still come over and you can select the clip. If you click on the Open Effects tab in the inspector, you get all of the controls. So if you wanted to try it out, you could and just show them. You can change the front blur and the back blur and things like that. So make it near blur and the far blur. So it gives it more of it's a really nice effect, tilt blur. effect. Now, if you don't obviously want this watermark in your program, the way you remove a resolve effect in the edit page is this little trash can icon, and you just click on it and it removes the effect. So it's totally fine if you're using the free version. You can show them. I think it's useful to show them that it does come up with a watermark, and that's how you can remove it, and you can still try it out and see if it does what you need it to do. Okay, so once we do that, now we come into framing clips. And the way we start with that is we want to make this a little bit more cinematic. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to timeline, we're going to come up to output blanking and choose 2.39 for a standard kind of widescreen cinema look to this. So you can see it gives us a widescreen over our entire project. Now you can then show them that it's in the entire timeline and go to your first interview clip, because that's what you want to show them, how it's now cut off his head and we'd like to reframe it. So what we're going to do is, if you want to, you can close down the effects library just to get a larger viewer. But we are on the first clip and we're going to select that first interview clip, and then we can come over to our inspector and see that it has zooms and positions. And if we just want to position Y up and down, Y, we would come over to the Y parameter and just click and start dragging to the left until you give him a little bit more headroom in our frame. You have 3 other clips from that interview that require kind of the same reposition. So what we're going to do is come over and show them how to copy and paste attributes. You select the clip, you come up to edit, and you choose copy. It's just the standard copy that you're going to use, Command C or Control C. And then we're going to select the 3 remaining interview clips in the timeline. So however you want to do that, I'm going to click on the first one, hold down my Command or Control key on Windows, and click the second one, and then click the final one. And once I do that, I can come back up to the Edit menu, and you're going to choose Paste Attributes. It's Option V or Alt V as the keyboard shortcut. But when you do that, you come up with a dialog box that not only shows you the selected clips, but it shows you the different attributes that you can paste. All we're interested in is this position attribute, so we're going to check on it, check the box for it, and then come down and click Apply. And then the positioning for the first clip that we copied from gets applied to the remaining 3 clips. So as you see, now that one's reframed, and that one's reframed, and that one's reframed, and all the headroom looks better now. So that's copy and paste attributes. The next thing that you will do is you're going to start keyframing, and that's again on the last marker, the same Bay Area clip. I'll zoom in. You definitely want to zoom in on this one since you're dealing with keyframes. And let's say that we wanted to select this clip and you want to create an animation where it kind of just pulls out from it's zoomed in and it pulls out as an ending shot. So what we can do is just zoom in on it first to begin with, and we can use the zoom X and Y parameters in the inspector. They're linked together, so we can just click and drag. I do it probably more than you normally would, just so people can, when you go to the curve editor, you want to see a nice line. So I'm just going to do like around 1.3 or something like that. Now this is your starting point. This is your starting frame, how you want it to look at the beginning of this clip. So I'm going to move my playhead to the very beginning, and to set a keyframe to animate this, you need 2 keyframes, one at the beginning and one at the end, and then Resolve will interpolate between the 2 parameters of the 2 keyframes. So to set a keyframe, I come over to Zoom. To the right of it, you're going to see this little diamond icon, and if you click on it, it turns red, and that indicates that you have set a keyframe at this point in time in your timeline. Now once you've set a keyframe on a clip, you don't have to set another one. Whenever you move the playhead and change the parameter, it will automatically add one for you. It's kind of an auto keyframe once you have one set for you. So what we're going to do is we are going to come down to the end of my clip here. I might go 1 frame back from the end just so I can still see it. And I could come up to the parameters here and reset it with the reset button, or I can also do things on screen. So I can come down into my lower left corner. Remember, we kind of did this for the dynamic zoom to show on-screen controls for that. Right now I'm going to click on it and choose transform, and up it's going to come a transform box. Now you can use the magnification menu here just to zoom out a little bit, right? So you can see the wireframe, and I'm going to grab a corner and just drag it in. And notice, not only am I dragging it on screen, right? I have handles all around. I have a rotation handle. I can click in the middle to reposition it. But if you look in the inspector, you've also added a keyframe. It turned red here to indicate that at this last frame of my clip, I've added a keyframe, which is roughly, the original size of the clip. I've just repositioned it. So now you have two keyframes, and it will interpolate as I drag backwards and forwards. You can see it's animating that frame. Now I might want to come back and turn off that on-screen control, so I can just click on the icon and to get rid of it. And I'll come up to my zoom menu, my magnification menu, and say fit, so it fits the frame in the viewer. And I can just play this back. Now, if you want to modify the acceleration of that animation, you can go into the curve editor. And the curve editor is located down here in the bottom of the clip, the lower right-hand corner. You're going to see two icons. One that looks like a little curve, and the other is a keyframe icon. So if you just want the keyframes, you can click the keyframe icon, and it opens up the keyframe editor that shows you the white dots. But if you want to see the actual curve, so you can customize the ease in, ease out, you will click on the curve editor. And here you have the curve, and these white dots are the keyframes. So if I want to smooth the out, I would hover my mouse over that point, that first keyframe, and you want to make sure you get this four-way arrow pointing over the icon. That means you can click and select that keyframe. If I'm anywhere else, I'm not going to select that keyframe. So you want to be very precise and make sure that you're over the keyframe and click it. It will turn red. And now you have these four buttons here. One is linear, and then you have an ease in, ease both, ease out. And I'm just going to choose to ease in. And when you do that, you get a little Bezier handle. And again, you look for the four-way icon when you know you're over the handle to modify it, if you want to modify it, and that's changing the acceleration. And you can do the same exact thing for the last keyframe. Make sure you get that four-way icon so you know that you're over the keyframe to select it, and then come up and you can choose ease out, and now you have a more S-curve kind of look to this, and it would be a smoother transition.
It's real.
But I moved the handle so you get a little bit modified view, but you get the idea. Now, when you want to close this up, you come back to this S-curve, this little S-curve icon, and close it up, and you have your animation done. All right, so now we talk about caching. So far, everything we've done plays in real time, but there are times when it won't play in real time, and for that, what you need is to enable caching. So first thing I'm going to do is see my entire timeline. So I'm going to Shift Z. And then I'm going to come up and show them where caching is. Playback, render cache. It's right now set to none, so there is no caching. So it's just going to play everything as fast as it can, and if it can't, it's going to drop frames on you. But here we can turn on smart caching, which will cause Resolve to look at the timeline and say, hey, if I can't play something, I'm going to cache it to my scratch disk that I set up in lesson 2, if you remember. So I'm going to turn on this render cache smart, and any place that it won't be able to render, it's going to show me little red dots, and you can see kind of like over here I have blue ones. Blue indicates, the blue line indicates that this area is cached. Now if I change this resolve at all, this transition at all, it's going to uncache, turn red, and say I need to render this, and it's going to render it in the background for me. So it's a caching system that automatically does it for you, and you can change these settings if you want to change the settings. And the way you do that is located up under the File menu, under Project Settings, and in master settings. So this is different from Resolve 12.5, just so you know. Master settings and the project settings now comes down to where it says optimize media, and some of the settings in optimized media have to do with the caching. So first, it's enabled background caching after 5 seconds, which means after your mouse is idle and your keyboard is idle for 5 seconds, it will initiate the render cache. And you can change that, obviously, if you want it to happen faster. We can change that to 3. And now after 3 seconds, it's going to start caching. And it's going to cache them in this codec. Whatever it says here under cached frames in this case it's ProRes, but you can click on it and choose another type of codec to cache in. And that all depends on your workflow. If you're dealing with ProRes proxy or proxy highly compressed clips, you might not care about doing it at a 422 10-bit cache because there's no value in that, but you can choose proxy and it will cache them faster. Or if you're dealing with some high resolution raw files, you may want to go even into uncompressed 16-bit float or ProRes 444 XQHDR or something like that to retain your bright highlights. So it just depends on your workflow and what type of media you're working with, what you want to cache. So once those are set, you can just say save, and now it's going to go through, and after 3 seconds it will render anything or cache anything that it needs in my timeline. And the little bars up here will show you the blue means that it is cached. When it's red, it means it needs to cache. So let's do something that requires maybe some caching, and that is retiming effects. Sometimes they do require caching and sometimes they don't. This is over this Milky Way is one of the shots that we use, and I'm going to zoom in on the Milky Way so we can see it more. Maybe center it more on screen here. So there are a couple of ways to do retiming. I'm going to show you a different way from what we saw in lesson 1. I'm going to right click over the Milky Way, and I'm going to come up to my menu and say change clip speed. And change clip speed will bring up a dialog that allows you to change the speed under percentage. It's even highlighted there. You also have other options in here that you can look at, but if we just wanted to change the speed to half speed, we can just enter 50% and then click on change. Now notice what happens to the clip, or more importantly, what doesn't happen to the clip when we click change. Nothing happens to the clip. It doesn't stretch out like it did when we did it in lesson 1, right? We dragged it further to make it slower speed. Here, with the menu change clip speed, it slowed it down, but it keeps the clip's position and duration in the timeline. So when we play this back, it's going to play back slower, but it doesn't extend the clip to show you the other frames that it had originally. So frames that you had originally get pushed off and they're no longer seen because the clip plays back at half speed, but at the same duration that it originally had. Now, this isn't exclusive from the retime control. You can turn those on as well. And once we do that, just like in lesson 1, right click, choose retime controls, you'll get your speed change bar. And you'll also get the 50% speed that we set. And we can change it this way as well once we do the change clip speed. So you can use either one and both in conjunction with each other if you want. So in this case, what we might want to do is say, oh, let's grab the handle. Now, when I grab this speed change handle and I drag to the right, look what it does. It overwrites that in next clip, that interview clip. So I'm going to undo that. When I switch it to the trim tool, guess what happens? It works just like the trim tool. I come down to the speed change bar. I get my retime cursor here, if you remember, like we had in lesson 1. And now when I drag it, it's going to ripple trim, right? Ripple trim, or it's not trimming, but it's going to ripple the timeline based on the duration of this clip that I'm retiming. And you can see down below it's showing me the duration or the speed percentage of my clip. I'm going to undo that because what I do want to do is overwrite that interview clip. And I'm just going to drag it out until I completely overwrite that interview clip. You can see it's playing back at 22% speed. This is actually a little menu that we haven't explored yet in the retime control, this little drop down menu. If you click on it, you have a whole bunch of options for retiming. You can change the speed to a more specific speed if you want, reset it to 100%. You can create freeze frames. If you want to reverse the segment, just click on reverse segment, and now it will play in reverse. So I'm going to play that, and now you can see it's slow motion in reverse. Now, what it does by default, let's talk about the processing of retime effects. What it does by default is it tries to do the fastest way that it can perform this type of speed change. And that's what's often called, if you scroll down to your inspector, come down to where it says retiming, you'll see retime process. There's a menu here. You have nearest, frame blend, and optical flow. Nearest is what it does by default because it is the fastest way possible to create a retime effects. If it's 50% speed, all it's doing is duplicating frames, right? So it might look stuttery on slow motion type stuff. On a clip without much motion, it might be totally fine. Frame blending is the next option, which will try and blend the frames as it does this slow motion effect. And then optical flow is the last one. Optical flow will try to create new in-between frames to slow things down. So it works great on some clips and not so great on others. If you have any kind of crisscrossing artifacts, cars, moving in the background, it probably won't work that well. But on some clips, it totally works great. But it does take processing. So if we choose it, you're going to get this red line, the caching line, right? It says it needs to cache this, and now you can see it processing it. And now it's done. So we could come back and play this, and it gives us a nice, smooth slow motion, as opposed to nearest. We'll turn the nearest on, and you can see stutter, stutter, stutter step. So it's your choice. Whichever one you want to do. Optical flow is probably a nice thing to try initially, just to see if it gives you good results. It doesn't take that long to process, and then you can just play it back and see how it looks.
Every shot was original.
And that ends lesson 6 of transitions and effects.